Hello and welcome to our video of the top 10 events, individuals and groups, and social, cultural, political factors in period 3. So number 1 is the development of Islam. The development of Islam will play a huge role in period 3 as we see many different cultures and societies being influenced by these values. Number 2 is the intensification of trade along trade routes. So many different trade routes, including the Indian Ocean Trade Network and the Silk Road, have great intensification of the amount of goods exchange along these routes. Number 3 is the development of credit and money economies. So credit and money economies are developed especially in China and the Mongol Empire, and these incorporate systems of banking and credit into the economy, which allows for a greater intensification of local trade. Number 4 is the state sponsorship of trade. The state sponsorship of trade occurs when states invest in infrastructure and invest in these different types of economies, such as credit and money economies. Number 5 is the expansion of empires. The expansion of empires, including the Islamic caliphates and the Mongol Empire, will help to benefit trade as it creates a unified empire and provides unification of a large landmass, which allows trade to occur more fluidly. Number 6 would be Bantu migrations. So Bantu migrations will shape Africa's history during this time period, as the Bantu people will come to dominate most of sub-Saharan Africa. Number 7 would be the development of merchant communities. So as trade gets intensified along these trade routes, merchant communities, these minority merchant communities develop, such as Islamic communities in China per se. Number 8 would be the spread of scientific knowledge. So the spread of scientific knowledge, especially among the Dar al-Islam, will be perpetuated in this period, and throughout the Dar al-Islam, technologies will spread, such as algebra is one example. Number 9 is the diversification of labor. So during this time period, people are not only focused just on agriculture, but labor diversification occurs, meaning that more people hold many different jobs. And number 10 is new forms of coerced labor occurred. So many different forms of coerced labor were introduced during this time period, such as corvée labor along with traditional chattel slavery. So going on to the top 10 individuals and groups, number 1 would be China in the form of many different empires. So China during this time period became increasingly industrialized and had a large capacity for industrial production, which helped the local economies and helped trade along the Silk Road. Number 2 would be Muslims. Muslims served as the main vehicle for scientific advancement throughout this entire time period. Number 3 would be the Mongols. The Mongols conquered most of Asia, and they were determined to create a unified Pan-Asian civilization. And they were successful to an extent. However, and during that time, they were able to foster the growth of trade. Number 4 is Genghis Khan, and Genghis Khan is the individual responsible for the advancement of the Mongol armies, as he served as a leader, a great military strategist, and a leader of the Mongol people. Number 5 would be feudal lords. Feudal lords had much influence over the feudal system in Europe. They provided lands to the vassals to help till, and they owned much of the power because the states were decentralized during the early Dark Ages. Number 6 would be merchants. So we're taking merchants here just in general. Merchants helped facilitate the diffusion of all these cultural and scientific advancements. Merchants served as a vehicle for the facilitation of the diffusion of all these goods and ideologies. Number 8 would be Sub-Saharan Africans. Sub-Saharan Africans would eventually come into contact with Islam, with Muslims, and eventually convert to Islam, and this would play a huge role in their inclusion in these big trade routes, such as the Indian Ocean Trade Network, the Trans-Saharan Trade Network, and the Silk Road. Number 9 would be slaves. Slavery increased in some places during this time. However, slavery maintained its general level. Slavery was not greatly increased or decreased during this time. However, new forms, including corvée labor, was introduced along with traditional chattel slavery. Number 10 would be maritime merchants. Maritime merchants were especially important because they helped actually diffuse the Black Plague into Europe, which would eventually end up killing 2/3 of its population. These maritime merchants most likely came from China, and they brought along with them fleas on rats to Europe, and helped spread this disease. Number 10 would be, the top 10 social, cultural, and political factors. Number 1 would be the spreading of religion. So the spreading of religion in any capacity, and especially in the capacity of, and especially specific to Islam, helped diffuse many different ideologies throughout the world and only intensified cross-cultural interactions. Number 2 is the development of feudalism. Feudalism developed in the European world because of the attacks of Vikings, which decentralized the powers of Europe to a great extent, and thus came feudal lords who actually had more power than the centralized governments during this time. Number 3 would be states' encouragement of trade. States' encouragement of trade through passport systems, through the development of credit and money economies, and through investment in infrastructure, all helped develop trade routes throughout this time, including the Indian Ocean Trade Network, Trans-Saharan Trade Network, and the Silk Road, especially the Silk Road. Number 4 would be state expansion. State expansion, especially the expansion of the Mongols during this time, help intensify these cross-cultural interactions. Number 5 would be the continuation of patriarchy. Patriarchy continued during this time. However, there were some notable exceptions, such as Sub-Saharan Africa, as noted by Ibn Battuta, and we'll get to him later. Number 6 would be the influence of the Pope. The influence of the Pope waxed and waned during this time period, going from high influence. So, Charlemagne, for example, his power was increased because of his affiliation with the Pope. However, throughout the rest of the High Middle Ages, the power of the Pope sort of waned a bit. Number 7 would be the demand for luxury goods. So as the Silk Road and Indian Ocean Trade Network only intensified, the demand for luxury goods increased, especially in China, and in India, and eventually this demand would increase in Europe as well throughout the High Middle Ages and going into period 4. Number 8 would be the spreading of maritime technologies. So the spreading of maritime technologies, including the astrolabe, lateen sail, junk ships, all helped intensify the trade networks, especially the Indian Ocean Trade Network, which greatly increased in volume and just sheer contact between societies because of this direct increase in the level of sophistication of technology, of maritime technology specifically. Number 9 would be cross-cultural interactions. Cross-cultural interactions in general in this time only intensified due to all of these other factors that we had discussed above. And because of these cross-cultural interactions intensifying, we see a global system of trade and interaction developing throughout this time period, which only further intensifies as we go along in world history through period 4 and further on. And number 10 would be the diffusion of language. The diffusion of language, and especially the spread of the Bantu language, was caused by migrations and commercial contacts between different regions, and these serve to create more strong cross-cultural interactions. And many people, especially Ibn Battuta, and other Islamic travelers got to experience different parts of the Dar al-Islam, and they got to see how the cultures varied. Although they were unified by one religion, he saw that the cultures actually varied because of the different variations of Islam adopted. And that is it for our top 10 video for period 3. I'll see you next time.